Welcome to this video on risk framework. On the CISSP exam, you are likely to be tested on a few different risk frameworks. So we are going to talk about those here in this particular video. Now, a risk framework is really nothing more than risk management, and ultimately it's a process for the assessment, control, monitoring and auditing of organizational risks. And risk framework are a part of risk management overall. The main risk framework you are going to see on the exam is NIST Special Publication 837 RMF, or the risk management framework. This is really designed for information system and organization. Before, in revision 1, it was focused toward federal information system. Now in the ref 2, it is focused more on just general information system and organizations. The RMF process provides a very flexible 7-step process that allow you to manage security and privacy risk within your system. And you should be familiar with each of the steps. So let's go over each of the different steps. Now, overall, the process look like this. Everything start in the middle with preparations, and this is a version 2 improvement. Before it was just the 6th step. Now they consider preparation because it's really the most important part of the whole process. I just don't understand why they never talked about it before, but now it is part of the process. So everything start with preparation, then it start with categorizing, selecting, implementing, assessing, authorizing and monitoring. Okay, so really part of the preparation is to identify the different roles, the overall business strategy, organizational strategies, the control providers. A lot of the time when you are implementing security controls, sometimes we can do what we call borrowing or inheriting control. Let's say you have a server installed in someone else's data center. Well, you can borrow or inherit the physical security controls of that data center or take credit for them as part of your operational system. So you can say we have access management on the door, we have alarm system, we have fire suppression system, all those different things, and those are inherited or borrowed control, meaning you don't control them but someone else does. So you can take credit for them kind of things. And really this is just a precursory look at the different controls, because what's going to end up happening is you are going to categorizing all the information, the data that is going to be processed by the information system. So you are going to identify all the organizational asset and you are going to categorize them in terms of risk, the value, and then you are going to document those things. Really what we are looking to capture here are the organizational asset and the data types. You are looking to capture your data types because that's determine what security controls you are going to select. And now you are going to select security control based on what you have categorized. And are we processing top secret information? Are we processing confidential information? Are we processing trade secret information? Do we have intellectual property? Do we have PII or personal identifiable information? You are going to categorize all of this. Then you are going to select control based on that. Then once you have selected controls and you have identified everything that you want to apply to provide the proper level of protection according to the compliance, regulation, laws, what have you, now you are going to go into the next step, which is implement. That's where you are going to deploy your security controls and the security control mechanism. Then document how you have done that and how they are being used within the system to protect according to the organizational policy, regulation, laws, standards, and so on. Once they have been implemented, you are going to take the next step, which is to assess, and that's to test the effectiveness of the controls in accordance with the compliance requirement with whatever governance has been set forth. So now we are going to do a security control assessment, a privacy impact assessment, whatever that might be, in order to verify that the implementation meet what we have selected and also protect what we have categorized. Once we have performed that assessment, we are satisfied with the result, we are satisfied with the overall risk that are left over. Now we are going to send this for authorization. This could either be to the senior management or it could be to a third party like an assessor or an aggregator, something like that, where now you are going to send all your information, deliver all your information, and pretty much identify what your risk level are and allow senior management or the aggregators or whatever, whoever, to make a determination, is this within our risk tolerance, and now am I okay with the residual risk on the system? If so, I will authorize that system to operate in its current state. Then you will step into what we call the monitoring phase, continuous monitoring to be specific. This is where you are going to evaluate the security controls, the effectiveness of those security controls on an ongoing basis. You are going to look at controls on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a periodic basis, an annual basis, whatever it's said to do within your continuous monitoring plan. This is the overall cycle, and also this risk framework will demonstrate due care and due diligence as a byproduct. The due care happening in the early stages with planning, with your categorization and the selecting control. Your due diligence with your assessment and your monitoring overall, plus the authorization process. Once you have an authorization within RMF, it's not infinite. It could be for a 1 year authorization, it could be 6 months authorization, it could be a 3 year authorization. It really depends on who is providing the authority and giving authorization to operate in that current state. And then the real due diligence happen in the continuous monitoring, where you are constantly checking those security controls to make sure that they are providing adequate level of protection. Because what is one thing about information system, they always change. So threats, vulnerabilities, emerging threats, emerging vulnerabilities, those things come into play, and monitoring will be help us capture those. And then what we do is, if we discover something, a control not working like we thought, it's not effective anymore because of this change, then what do? We go back to the selection process again. We tailor in controls, we tailor our controls, and then we go through implementation, assessment, back through authorization, and then back into monitoring. So that's the RMF in a nutshell. You need to know for this exam. So be very familiar with this step and what happened at each of these steps. One of the other framework to be familiar with is the ISO 31000. This is not near as important as NIST RMF, but you should be familiar with this process as well. This is an 8-principle risk management framework process. It provides a common approach to managing any type of risk within an industry. So it's not necessarily just technical risk, it could be any kind of risk, and their overall process look like this. Now there's a lot happening here. You don't need to know all of this for the exam. You don't need to know all its ins and out for the exam. Overall, the process is very similar to the RMF, where if you look down here on the lower left, you have integration designing, implementation, evaluation, and improvement. They are very similar steps. In fact, most framework that you are going to come across are similar in this regard. You need to plan, you need to identify, design solution in order to reduce risk, and then implement those things and evaluate them for their effectiveness, right? That's pretty much in the nutshell. But within this framework, the ISO 31000, you need to be familiar with the principle, starting with integrated. Risk management needs to be integrated into the overall organization. Then we have structured and comprehensive. That means that you have a structured and comprehensive approach to your overall risk management. Then we have customized. This is where the framework should be customized to meet the needs of the organization and the overall risk of organization. Then we have inclusive. The human and cultural factor should influence all aspects of risk management. What does that mean? What that means is the human element. Now, users are using the system and the culture within the organization. What's acceptable about how things are done, how things are used, it is acceptable. Just bring your own device and connect it up to the system. Some organization allow that and it's okay. Some organization very strict about that. So we want to make an inclusive process that account for the human side of thing and also the operational culture of the organization. That needs to be taken in account. When it comes to risk management, we also want to dynamic. We want that risk management process to be dynamic, to anticipate, to be proactive, to detect things, to acknowledge them, and also to respond to organizational changes. Again, information system change frequently. So we want to be dynamic at that approach with risk management. We don't want to be structured. We want to be flexible, approachable, and we want to adapt to that change. Your risk management process should also consider the best available information. What that means is there are limitations in what's available to you as a consumer, as a user, things like that. The risk management needs to consider or make assumption and constraint based on the information that's available to both the user, administrator, and so on. And again, even within the principle, again, we are talking about human and cultural factors. And again, we are focused on that dynamic response and ability within risk management to consider how the users and the organizational culture affect risk at each level and each stages of the organization. And then lastly, we have the continual improvement, which is very similar to the continuous monitoring or continuous improvement, where risk management is continuously approached. It's improved upon through learning and experience throughout the organization. Then we also have a risk management framework, COSO, the Committee of Sponsoring Organization. This is an enterprise risk management framework that's focused specifically on corporate governance. Where you are going to see COSO is in the Sarbanes-Oxley. Especially, COSO is used for Sarbanes-Oxley 404 compliance and for the requirements. This is important to know for the exam. This is also important to know in the real world if you are dealing with Sarbanes-Oxley. You need to be familiar with the term COSO and its driving factor behind the governance that helps demonstrate compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley. Now, the components within COSO are little bit different than what we talked about in the other risk frameworks, starting with governance and culture. And you can see that the factor here is a mission, vision, and core values. So we are really looking for setting this stage, setting the tone within the organization of how risk is going to be managed. And we talked about culture in the ISO 31000, right? So now you can see how organizational culture has an influence over how risk is managed and how it's handled within each organization. Then we have the strategy and objective setting. This is also strategy development, and if you go all the way back to the NIST RMF, it's very similar to categorizing and selecting your controls. What are the overall strategies? The enterprise risk, how it is being managed, what's the strategy, what's the objective, and how is it working together with the overall strategic planning process within the organization or within the business. Then you have performance. This is where you are evaluating the risk and how it is impacting the overall strategy within the organization and your ability to achieve the objectives that are set forth. Again, business objective, business enabled, that's what we are focused on in security. And this model specifically focus on that in the performance component. Then you have review and revision. This is very similar to continuous monitoring. So by reviewing the performance, the effectiveness of the control, how you have been employed, how you have them deployed now, and how the organizations responding to the risks. You can take a look at how things are implemented and the overall performance of those implementation. And then lastly, we have information, communication, and reporting. This provide the enhanced value. This is where we go to our senior management, our stakeholders, and we take a look at the overall process. We inform them on the metrics, the information, both internal and external sources, how the information is flowing up and down in the chain, and how risk is being reported, how it's being responded to, how it is being handled across the organization. So there are different components of COSO. Again, the NIST RMF being the most important, but be familiar with these other models. So the bottom line here is understand the purpose of the risk management, know the NIST RMF inside and out, and understand the ISO 31000 and the COSO framework as well.